What if Atlantis never truly vanished? What if, even now, as you listen in the quiet of night, vast halls of stone still rest beneath the ocean, hidden under silt and silence, waiting for someone to remember them? The question lingers like a dream you can't quite shake, a whisper that pulls you out of the ordinary and into the extraordinary. Tonight, we follow that whisper. Where are you listening from? Is it late at night? The world around you dim and hushed? Or are you somewhere in between, resting perhaps with headphones as the ocean of your own thoughts begins to rise and fall? However you've arrived here, you're part of a circle of dreamers spread across the world. People who close their eyes and let curiosity carry them further than daylight ever could. Before we go deeper, a gentle invitation. If you find comfort in wandering through questions like these, you may choose to subscribe to stay part of this circle so the next story waits for you when night returns. No pressure, no urgency, just an open door whenever you wish to step back in. Atlantis. The name alone feels like a key. It unlocks an entire world of memory, myth, and speculation. For most, it begins with Plato, the philosopher who spoke of a great island civilization destroyed in a single day and night of misfortune. For others, it's an image of shining domes, glittering towers, and knowledge beyond our own. And yet, what if the truth is neither pure fable nor fantasy? What if the story is an echo, softened by centuries, of something that was once real? The ocean hides more than it reveals. Beneath its waves lie drowned coastlines, lost plains, and valleys swallowed when the ice of the last great age melted away. If entire continents of land could vanish beneath rising seas, why not cities too? Why not cultures, forgotten simply because the tides claimed them long before history was written down? This is the tension at the heart of Atlantis. Mainstream certainty telling us it is myth, and the deeper pull of mystery asking us to look again, to wonder if the story is older, stranger, more elusive than we ever imagined. Tonight, we walk that line together. We will travel through memory and myth, through science and speculation. We will ask how such a place might have existed, how the earth could hide it, and what it would mean if proof were ever uncovered. Along the way, we will pause, not to demand answers, but to let the questions themselves settle like waves upon the shore. So breathe, slow and easy, as the night deepens. The story of Atlantis has waited thousands of years. Tonight, it is here for you. Let us begin our journey where all stories of the lost world begin, with the first whispers of its name in the ancient world. Every story has a doorway, and for Atlantis, that doorway opens through the words of Plato. Nearly 2,400 years ago, in the quiet rhythms of ancient Athens, he set quill to wax tablets and recorded two dialogues, Timaeus and Critias. Inside them, almost as a side note to larger discussions of philosophy and politics, appears the first description of the lost world. Plato does not tell it as invention. Instead, he insists it is history, a story passed down through generations. He describes a mighty island empire beyond the pillars of Heracles, which we now call the Strait of Gibraltar. Atlantis, he wrote, was larger than Libya and Asia combined. Its people commanded fleets, ruled vast lands, and possessed knowledge far beyond their neighbors. But their greatness, he warns, gave way to arrogance. In a single day and night of misfortune, Atlantis was swallowed by the sea. Most historians today view these dialogues as allegory, moral teaching wrapped in story. For Plato, Atlantis may have been a way to illustrate the dangers of pride, the fragility of power, and the consequences of forgetting harmony with the divine. And yet, the detail is striking. He describes concentric rings of land and water, canals feeding into harbors, temples gilded with metals unknown to his contemporaries. If his intention was purely symbolic, why such architectural precision? Why the geography, the measurements, the sense of something remembered rather than imagined? This is where the tension begins. Mainstream scholarship assures us Atlantis is myth, but for seekers and dreamers, the vividness of Plato's account feels like something more, a memory, not just a metaphor. Was he recording rumor? Was he echoing an older tradition handed to him through teachers, travelers, or forgotten texts? Or was he preserving a fragment of history already ancient in his time, a story older than Athens itself? The meditative power of Atlantis begins here, in this uncertainty. Imagine yourself in Plato's world, a candlelit chamber, the air thick with smoke and discussion, students leaning forward as he spoke of an island empire beyond the western seas. To them, it may have sounded distant, impossible, or perhaps familiar in ways we no longer grasp. To us, it feels like the spark of a mystery still burning thousands of years later. Every tale of Atlantis, every speculation, every search begins with these dialogues. They are the seed from which centuries of wonder have grown, and as we step further into this journey, we must keep one truth in mind. Whether allegory or memory, Plato's words remind us that stories have power, not only to teach, but to endure. Plato never claimed the story of Atlantis was his own invention. In Critias, he insists it came from an older source, a tale passed from Egyptian priests to the lawgiver Solon, then carried down through generations until it reached him. This chain of transmission is easy to dismiss, yet it is also haunting. If true, it suggests that even in Plato's time, the memory of Atlantis was already ancient, a fragment preserved across centuries like an ember glowing faintly in the ashes of forgotten fires. The Egyptians were masters of memory. Their civilization spanned thousands of years, longer than the time separating us from Rome. Within their temples were records etched in stone, stories carved in hieroglyphs, accounts of floods, dynasties, and gods who reigned before men. When Solon visited Egypt, as Plato tells it, the priests of Sais mocked the Greeks for being children in history, for keeping only short records and forgetting the deeper cycles of time. To them, the tale of a great island empire swallowed by the sea was not myth, but memory, one of many catastrophes that had reshaped the world. Here lies a striking contrast. For us, 2,400 years feels impossibly distant. For the Egyptians, stories reached back tens of thousands of years into eras we call prehistory. Could the tale of Atlantis be one of those ancient recollections, passed orally, guarded by priestly traditions, surviving where fragile artifacts and cities could not? Oral traditions, after all, can be astonishingly durable. Aboriginal stories in Australia have been linked to real sea level changes more than 7 millennia ago. If such echoes can persist for thousands of years, is it so impossible that fragments of an even older event lingered in Egyptian memory, later flowing into Plato's pen? Imagine this lineage of storytelling. An Egyptian priest, standing in a temple lit by oil lamps, speaking of cycles of flood and fire. Solon, listening, astonished at the vast scales of time being described. Centuries later, Plato, weaving the account into his philosophy, unsure himself whether it was allegory or history. Across each link, details shift, but the essence remains. A once great land lost to the sea. Whether literal or symbolic, the Egyptian connection gives Atlantis a weight that pure invention lacks. It frames the tale not as sudden myth-making, but as a shard of something older, reshaped by the tides of culture. And it reminds us that human memory is not confined to written words. Sometimes it flows like a river, carrying fragments of forgotten worlds long after their stones have crumbled. Atlantis is not alone. Across the world, civilizations tell of lost golden ages, drowned lands, and cities swallowed by catastrophe. These parallels raise a quiet but compelling question. Why does nearly every culture remember a time before time, a place of greatness erased from the world? In Mesopotamia, the Epic of Gilgamesh speaks of a great flood that wiped clean the earth. In India, ancient Sanskrit texts recall kingdoms destroyed by rising waters and celestial wars. The Maya tell of previous worlds ended by deluge and fire. Aboriginal Australians speak of coastal lands that once stretched far beyond today's shorelines. Even in North America, native traditions hold stories of entire peoples swept away when the earth shifted. These myths do not match in detail, yet their themes converge: prosperity followed by destruction, a cycle of rise and fall, and survivors carrying memory into a new age. Mainstream scholars explain this as natural. Nearly all early cultures lived near rivers and coasts, where floods were common and devastating. Catastrophes would naturally enter their myths. But there is another, more speculative possibility: that these stories preserve faint echoes of real global upheavals, the kind that might erase entire societies. For a bedtime listener, imagine how such stories felt in their first telling: a circle of people gathered around firelight, elders recalling not just the deeds of ancestors, but the memory of worlds gone before. In those moments, myth was not entertainment, but survival, a way to pass warnings across centuries. The sea can rise, the earth can burn. Remember, could Atlantis be one more link in this chain? A European echo of a far older human memory, reshaped by each tongue that told it. There is also something deeply human in the idea of a golden age. It reflects our longing for perfection, for harmony with the world and with each other. Perhaps Atlantis resonates not only because it might be true, but because it represents what we feel we have lost: a time of balance before pride and greed led to downfall. In that sense, whether literal or metaphorical, Atlantis is universal. It belongs to a chorus of stories reminding us that greatness is fragile and that even the most radiant civilizations can sink beneath their own weight. This is why Atlantis endures when other myths fade. It is not just one story, it is every story of loss, every fear of impermanence, every whisper that what we call progress may be only fragile tide. Atlantis is more than a lost city. Over centuries, it has become an archetype, a pattern that lives in the human imagination, halfway between history and myth. When people speak of Atlantis, they are rarely just speaking of Plato's island. They are invoking the idea of a perfect world undone, a reminder that even brilliance can be fragile. Think of how the word itself is used today. Atlantis appears in novels, films, music, and even scientific speculation. To some, it symbolizes lost technology. To others, spiritual wisdom. In New Age traditions, Atlantis is imagined as a civilization of enlightenment, where humans lived in harmony with the cosmos. For skeptics, it is a cautionary tale, proof that myths can grow wild when untethered from evidence. Both readings are true in their own way, because archetypes are not about facts, they are about meaning. Atlantis endures because it balances on a knife's edge. If it were purely myth, it might have faded like countless other allegories. If it were proven fact, it would have become a settled chapter of history. Instead, it exists in the liminal space between unproven yet unforgettable, disputed yet irresistible. That tension gives it power. Psychologists like Carl Jung once suggested that myths resonate because they reflect the collective unconscious. Atlantis could be one such reflection, the archetype of the lost paradise, the dream of perfection, ruined by hubris. Every generation sees itself in the story, the rise, the fall, the warning. We read Atlantis not only as something that may have been, but as something that always could be. Now imagine this. Perhaps Atlantis never existed as a single place. Perhaps it is a mosaic of many memories, floods, disasters, vanished lands, woven into one shining story. In that sense, Atlantis is both nowhere and everywhere. It is an echo chamber where history and imagination meet, a reminder of the fragility of civilizations, whether they lived 10,000 years ago or live today. As you listen in the quiet, notice how the story works upon you. It is not just curiosity about ruins under the sea. It is a gentle unease, a recognition that our own cities, shining with lights, might one day be remembered the same way as legends of towers swallowed by time. That is the true power of Atlantis as archetype. It is less about where it was and more about what it says about us now. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the Earth not as it is now, but as it was 12,000 years ago, at the end of the last great ice age. The world you would step into would feel both familiar and utterly alien. The continents were in roughly the same places, but their edges were drawn differently, sketched by the hand of ice. Vast glaciers stretched like white mountains across the northern hemisphere, burying Canada, Scandinavia, and much of northern Europe under miles of frozen weight. The air was colder, harsher, and drier. Winters cut deep, and summers were brief gifts. But the planet was not simply frozen wasteland. In the south, lush grasslands stretched across Africa, rich savannas teeming with life. In Asia, deserts shifted and expanded, but great river valleys carved out fertile corridors where human and animal alike found sustenance. In the tropics, warmth remained dense jungles, humming with life, stood much as they do today, those shaped by cooler winds and shifting rains. Sea levels were dramatically lower, for so much water was trapped in those continental ice sheets. The shorelines we know now simply did not exist. Instead, broad coastal plains stretched far into what we would call the ocean. The English Channel was not a channel at all, but dry land connecting Britain to Europe. Between Siberia and Alaska, a vast land bridge called Beringia spread wide, a frozen highway for animals and people to cross into new worlds. Around Southeast Asia, the shallow seas had pulled back, uniting islands into great landmasses. For humans, this was a time of testing and ingenuity. Our species, Homo sapiens, was already fully present, anatomically modern, with minds as capable as ours. But life was defined by adaptation. People moved with herds, followed the changing rivers, and survived on sharp observation of a changing environment. Yet within them was the same spark we carry: curiosity, memory, and imagination. To walk the earth at this time would be to witness landscapes we can scarcely picture today. Rivers running where none now flow, valleys now drowned, plains now hidden under waves. It was a world in motion, poised on the edge of a profound transformation. And here lies the question: if civilizations or great cultures had taken root along those broad, rich coastlines, what would remain of them now? When the ice melted and the seas began their slow, relentless rise, entire worlds disappeared. Fields became seabeds, villages became reefs. If anything of Atlantis or something like it stood then, it would have been swallowed whole, hidden beneath layers of salt water and time. The Earth at the end of the Ice Age was not just a frozen world, it was a shifting canvas, preparing to redraw itself. And on that canvas, much could have been painted, only to be washed away. When the ice began to melt, the world changed forever. It was not sudden in the rhythm of a single lifetime, but across centuries the seas crept higher, reshaping the edges of continents. Imagine standing on a broad plain that stretched far beyond today's shores, only to watch year after year as the ocean advanced, swallowing fields, forests, and settlements alike. For those who lived through it, the rising sea was not abstract science. It was memory carved in loss. Geologists tell us that between about 12,000 and 8,000 years ago, sea levels rose more than 100 meters. That is an entire skyscraper's height of ocean poured across the continents. Whole landscapes vanished. Doggerland, once a vast region connecting Britain to Europe, became seabed beneath the North Sea. Sunderland, the enormous extension of Southeast Asia, sank into the waters, leaving behind only the islands of Indonesia and the Philippines. Beringia, the bridge between Asia and the Americas, was drowned, sealing peoples apart. Today, when we gaze at maps, we take coastlines as permanent, but they are anything but. The ocean is restless, advancing and retreating with the pulse of climate. For early humans, those changes were monumental. Vast hunting grounds disappeared. Rivers that once flowed through valleys were cut short, swallowed by the sea. Communities would have been forced inland, abandoning the lowlands where they may have flourished for generations. It is here that speculation intertwines with memory. If human groups, or even early civilizations, had developed along those fertile coastal plains, the evidence of their lives would now be hidden under waves and layers of silt, stone tools, fire pits, wooden dwellings, perhaps even monuments. All would rest beyond reach, entombed by the ocean. Our archaeology focused mainly on dry land, rarely peers deep beneath the waves. This leaves immense stretches of human possibility unexplored, forgotten, not because they never existed, but because they are difficult to touch. Legends of lost lands echo this transformation. Stories of drowned kingdoms, swallowed shores, and floods sent by gods might preserve more than moral lessons. They may be the lingering memory of a time when the seas themselves were destroyers. Atlantis, if it existed, may not have been unique, but part of a broader human experience, civilizations built along coasts that were eventually erased. To walk those drowned worlds now would mean diving into silence. Submerged valleys, ridges, and plateaus lie beneath the ocean floor, invisible to most eyes. And in that silence, the imagination whispers, what if? What if beneath those waters lie not only fossils of animals and plants, but ruins of forgotten peoples? What if Atlantis is simply one name for countless coastlines lost to the rising tide? The seas rose, and with them, human history lost a chapter, perhaps more than one. Picture a world map stretched out before you, but redraw its edges. Remove the familiar coastlines, extend the continents outward, and imagine the continents joined by lands that no longer rise above the sea. This was Earth not so long ago, a planet with landscapes we cannot walk today, for they lie beneath hundreds of feet of water. Doggerland in the north was once a sweeping plain of rivers, lakes, and forests. Archaeologists have dredged up tools, bones, and fragments of dwellings from the North Sea, reminders that people once lived where waves now churn. It was a place of deer and mammoths, of human families crossing green valleys. Today, fishing nets catch traces of that vanished world, proof that memory sometimes lingers in fragments of wood or stone. Far to the east, Sunderland stretched across what is now Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines. With sea levels lower, this region formed a continent-sized landmass, rich in rivers, fertile soils, and tropical abundance. It would have been an extraordinary place for early people, a cradle of biodiversity, an expanse of forests and coastal plains. When the sea rose, Sunderland fractured into islands. Could this shattering of land into thousands of fragments echo in the many myths of floods and drowned kingdoms that spread across Southeast Asia? Even more immense was Beringia, the bridge that once linked Siberia to Alaska. It was not just a corridor but a vast expanse, hundreds of miles wide, with grasslands, herds of animals, and human camps. For millennia, people crossed it, carrying stories, tools, and traditions from one world to another. When the waters came, that bridge sank beneath the Bering Strait, leaving the continents forever divided. We live as though today's Earth is permanent, yet more than 20 million square kilometers of land was swallowed at the end of the Ice Age, an area larger than North America. These were not barren deserts. They were homes, hunting grounds, sacred spaces. For those who lived there, the rising waters must have seemed like the slow unmaking of the world. And yet, what remains of those worlds now? Only traces a harpoon here, a stone tool there, pulled from beneath the waves. The rest lies hidden under layers of sediment. Rivers once flowing now run as buried channels beneath the seafloor. Hills that touch the sky are drowned mountains, their peaks barely breaking the surface as rocky islands. If entire continents of land have disappeared, then the idea of a lost city like Atlantis is no longer implausible. It is not that such places could not have existed. It is simply that they are harder to see, harder to reach, harder to remember. The Earth has shifted its face, leaving us to wonder what worlds once flourished in the space where waves now roll. When we speak of vanished landscapes, we often imagine only the geography, the plains now hidden, the valleys submerged, the ridges erased by waves. But behind every drowned world lies a deeper possibility that entire threads of human history may have been lost with them. For what is civilization, if not rooted in the land on which it stands? When the land vanishes, so too can the memory of its people. Think of the great coastal plains at the edge of Ice Age seas. These were fertile, rich in game, watered by rivers, and perfect for settlement. If groups of humans began experimenting with farming, building, or even early forms of community organization, Would it not have been there, along shorelines where fish were abundant, where soils were dark and generous, where trade could flow as easily as the tides? And yet, these are the very places the sea has hidden. Mainstream archaeology tells us the first great civilizations arose in river valleys around 10,000 years ago. Mesopotamia, the Indus, the Nile. But what if this record is only the beginning of what survived? What if earlier experiments, earlier sparks of culture, were erased beneath the oceans before history had a chance to notice? In this light, Atlantis ceases to be a fantastical outlier. It becomes one name for a broader truth, that human ambition may have taken root more than once, only to be washed away by rising seas. There is a sobering lesson in this. We think of progress as linear, each generation climbing higher than the last, but the drowned world suggests another pattern. Civilizations may rise, but they can fall too, sometimes so completely that even their ruins cannot be found. Time and tide conspire to make them invisible, leaving only whispers in myth and traces in memory. For us today, standing on the shorelines of our modern cities, the lesson is humbling. Our coasts feel permanent, lined with towers of steel and concrete. Yet in geological time, they are as fragile as the wooden huts of Doggerland. Should the seas rise again, as climate science warns they will, how much of our own world might be swallowed? What fragments of us would endure, and what would sink without trace? The drowned world does not only speak of the past, it speaks of the future. Atlantis, real or imagined, is a mirror held to our own fragility, just as the sea erased their shores. It could one day erase ours, and in the silence that follows, what would the next generation remember? A legend of shining cities, lost in a single night, or nothing at all? When people first hear of Atlantis, their minds leap to faraway oceans, to distant islands beneath endless waves. Yet for centuries, many seekers have looked closer to home, within the familiar waters of the Mediterranean. If Plato's dialogues are taken literally, he places Atlantis beyond the Pillars of Heracles, known today as the Strait of Gibraltar. But if his geography was misunderstood or symbolic, then perhaps the lost city was never so far at all. One candidate often mentioned is the island of Santorini, once called Thera. Around 1600 BCE, a volcanic eruption tore the island apart, blasting its center into the sky and collapsing its heart into the sea. The destruction was so fierce, it reshaped the entire region, creating the caldera we see today. The eruption sent shockwaves across the Aegean, destroying settlements, darkening skies, and possibly inspiring legends of sudden catastrophe. To some, the thriving Minoan civilization, with its advanced art, trade, and architecture, is a convincing model for Atlantis, a culture brilliant in its achievements, cut down by nature's violence. Yet others point to Crete itself, the center of Minoan power, its sprawling palaces, labyrinthine halls, and vast fleets speak of a people who dominated the seas. The Minoans were eventually undone by earthquakes, tidal waves, and foreign invasions. Could Plato's Atlantis be a memory of their rise and fall, distorted by time into the image of a great island swallowed by water? Another suggestion lies off the coast of Spain, near the city of Cadiz. Archaeologists have uncovered traces of ancient settlements in marshlands, some shaped in concentric rings like those described in Plato's accounts. The region of Dunyana, now a protected national park, has sparked speculation that beneath its mud and marsh may lie the vestiges of an Atlantean memory, a once thriving city drowned and forgotten. Mainstream scholars remain cautious. They remind us that Plato was a philosopher, not a historian. To them, Santorini, Crete, or Cadiz may explain the inspiration, but not the literal truth. Still, for those who search, the Mediterranean feels like a natural cradle for Atlantis. It is a sea of myths, of Troy, once thought to be legend, of Pompeii, buried and rediscovered, of cities sunken and raised across millennia. Why not Atlantis too? Imagine drifting over the waters of the Aegean on a quiet evening, the sun dipping into the horizon. Beneath the waves, fragments of walls, staircases, and roads whisper of lives once lived, whether Minoan, Mycenaean, or something else entirely. The Mediterranean carries the memory of civilizations undone by fire, sea, and time. Perhaps Atlantis was not a single island, but a story born of many tragedies woven together, each one a reminder of how fragile human greatness can be. If not the Mediterranean, then perhaps Atlantis lies further west, in the vast Atlantic Ocean that bears its name. This idea has fascinated explorers for centuries that somewhere beyond the horizon, across the restless waves, a great island empire once stood before vanishing into the sea. The Azores are among the most popular candidates. Rising from the mid-Atlantic ridge, these volcanic islands seem almost deliberately placed in the middle of the ocean. To dreamers, they are the scattered peaks of a once larger continent, the mountain tops of Atlantis itself. Their dramatic cliffs, steaming fumaroles, and deep valleys spark the imagination. If a landmass here once sank, might these islands be its surviving fragments? Scientists, however, remind us that the geology tells a different story. The Azores are volcanic outcrops formed over millions of years, never part of a lost continent. Yet their haunting beauty continues to inspire seekers. Further south lies the Canary Islands, just off the coast of Africa. Rich in myth and mystery, they were once considered by European sailors to be the edge of the known world. Some have suggested these islands might have been remnants of a larger land swallowed by rising seas. Their volcanic origins and ancient Guanche culture add layers of fascination, though mainstream geology again denies any sunken continent in this region. The Atlantic's allure extends even further. In the Caribbean, the Bahamas have captured attention with the so-called Bimini Road, a submerged formation of large stone blocks arranged in a pattern that looks uncannily like a causeway. Discovered in the 1960s, it quickly became linked to Atlantis in popular imagination. Was it a road, a pier, a fragment of architecture, or is it simply a natural formation, the product of geology mistaken for design? To believers, it is a tantalizing clue. To skeptics, it is proof of how easily nature can mimic human hands. Beyond these islands, others argue that Atlantis may have been a lost land closer to West Africa or the Americas, its people spreading knowledge and culture across oceans long before Columbus. Here the theories become bold, blending myth with speculation about transoceanic contact in deep prehistory. Mainstream historians push back, but the questions remain. Could early sailors have crossed seas? Could stories of lost homelands be the shadows of real journeys? The Atlantic is immense, covering 1/5 of Earth's surface. To search for Atlantis here is like searching for a whisper in a storm. Yet this immensity is part of the appeal. Somewhere in those depths, in the silence beneath thousands of meters of water, lies the possibility that Plato's tale holds a kernel of truth. And for many, the name Atlantis feels too perfectly suited to the Atlantic itself to be coincidence. Not all seekers of Atlantis keep to the familiar waters of the Mediterranean or the Atlantic. Some cast their gaze to the far edges of the world, to remote and radical locations where the story might take on stranger shapes. These theories, though unconventional, remind us that the mystery of Atlantis has always been as much about imagination as evidence. One of the most provocative ideas places Atlantis in Antarctica. At first, this sounds impossible, a continent locked in ice for millions of years. Yet some proponents argue that ancient maps, like the Piri-Reis chart of the 1500s, show parts of Antarctica free of ice, suggesting older knowledge of the land beneath. If, as fringe theorists propose, the continent was once warmer in the distant past, could it have hosted civilizations later buried under glaciers? Mainstream science is skeptical. Antarctica has been frozen for far longer than humans have walked the Earth, but the image lingers beneath miles of ice, entire cities entombed in silence, waiting. Others look to the Americas. Some suggest Atlantis could be linked to the cultures of Mesoamerica, Maya, Aztec, or even earlier peoples. The grandeur of their temples and the precision of their calendars spark speculation that they were heirs to a forgotten mother civilization across the seas. In South America, the plain of Bolivia's Lake Titicaca and the monumental site of Tiwanaku have been drawn into Atlantean debates. Their massive stonework inspiring theories of connections to Plato's lost world. Further east, in the vast Pacific, lies another possibility. Could Atlantis and the Polynesian myths of Lemuria or Mu be different names for the same memory? Here, instead of one lost island, we find stories of sprawling continents swallowed by the sea. For some, Atlantis and Mu are twin myths, echoes of humanity's fear that the ocean, which gives life, can also erase entire worlds. There are even radical theories placing Atlantis beneath the Sahara Desert. The Eye of the Sahara, or Richat structure in Mauritania, is a striking circular formation visible from space, resembling Plato's description of Atlantis's concentric rings. To believers, it is a perfect match, its channels and natural geology aligned with the philosopher's account. To scientists, it is a natural erosion feature, beautiful but unrelated. Still, its uncanny form continues to inspire curiosity. Each of these locations stretches the boundaries of plausibility, yet they also highlight something essential. Atlantis has never been pinned down to one place. It is an idea as much as a destination, and wherever humans find mystery in ice, desert, jungle, or sea, we are tempted to imagine Atlantis there. Perhaps this is the true point. Atlantis may not belong to one location at all, but to every horizon where the known dissolves into the unknown. Why does the search for Atlantis persist, even when no conclusive evidence has been found? Why does a story told in two ancient dialogues still ripple across centuries, stirring explorers, scientists, and dreamers alike? Perhaps the answer lies not in geography, but in psychology. Atlantis is as much a mirror of ourselves as it is a mystery of the past. Part of the endurance comes from hope. To find Atlantis would be to discover that history is far deeper than we believe, that our story is not confined to the last few thousand years, but stretches into forgotten chapters. Each expedition, each sonar scan of the seabed, carries the tantalizing possibility of rewriting what it means to be human. That hope alone is powerful enough to keep the search alive. There is also the allure of loss. Atlantis is not just about greatness, it is about downfall. The idea that a mighty civilization could vanish in a single night speaks to our deepest fears, that no matter how high we build, nature or fate can undo it all. In this sense, the legend of Atlantis becomes a warning, echoing through time. Civilizations are fragile, and hubris has consequences. Every era finds its own reflection in that caution. At the same time, Atlantis invites imagination. Writers, filmmakers, and philosophers have reshaped it countless times. A utopia of wisdom, a kingdom of technology, a cautionary tale of arrogance. Its details remain just vague enough for us to project our own desires and anxieties onto it. For one listener, Atlantis is a paradise lost. For another, it is a metaphor for climate change. For yet another, it is a promise that we are not the first to dream of greatness. Science, too, plays its part. While most archaeologists reject Atlantis as literal history, discoveries of real sunken cities like Pavlopetri in Greece or Dwarka in India remind us that legends sometimes grow from truth. If Troy, once dismissed as pure myth, could be found in the sands of Turkey, who is to say Atlantis cannot emerge from the depths one day? And so the search continues, not only in the Mediterranean or Atlantic, but in deserts, jungles, and polar ice. Each generation takes up the quest anew, guided as much by imagination as by evidence. Even when skeptics dismiss it, Atlantis remains unsilenced, because it satisfies a longing no amount of rational explanation can erase, the longing to believe there is more to the past than we know. Perhaps that is why Atlantis endures. It is not only about where it might be found, but about why we want to find it. Atlantis is less a place than a promise that beyond the limits of our knowledge, the world may still hold secrets vast enough to change everything. The ocean is Earth's greatest keeper of secrets. It covers more than 70% of the planet, and yet we have explored only a fraction of its floor. Beneath those waves lie not only coral reefs and trenches, but places that hint at human presence, ruins, or at least structures that look like ruins waiting in the silence of the deep. Perhaps the most famous is the Yonaguni Monument off the coast of Japan. In 1986, a diver discovered massive stone formations, underwater terraces, steps, and what appear to be carved platforms. Some believe they are natural, sculpted by currents and earthquakes. Others insist they bear the marks of human design, a sunken city thousands of years older than any known in Asia. To swim along those steps, descending into blue-green light, is to feel caught between geology and architecture, unable to say which hand shaped them. Far across the world, in the Bahamas, lies the Bimini Road. Large stone blocks rest in a line beneath shallow water, resembling a causeway or harbor wall. Skeptics argue they are natural beach rock, fractured by the sea, yet their neat arrangement invites the imagination to see a road stretching toward a vanished land. Some connect it to Edgar Cayce's prophecies of Atlantis rising in the 20th century, a modern myth laid upon an ancient mystery. Other sites add to the puzzle. Off the coast of India, near Dwarka, sonar surveys have revealed submerged walls, streets, and artifacts suggesting urban structures drowned millennia ago. In the Gulf of Cambay, vast patterns of stone blocks and possible man-made features have been detected, though debate continues. In the Mediterranean, fragments of ruins lie beneath harbors and bays, reminders that earthquakes and rising seas have erased many chapters of coastal history. Each discovery raises the same question: how much of human history lies beneath the waves? If seas have risen more than 100 meters since the Ice Age, then countless settlements, perhaps even early cities, are lost to the ocean. Our picture of the past is built mostly on what lies on dry land, yet the coastlines of 10,000 years ago are gone, and with them, perhaps, stories we will never fully recover. To imagine Atlantis is to look through this lens, not as fantasy, but as possibility. The ocean floor is vast, its sediment heavy, its silence deep. Could it be that among the ridges and plains, beneath layers of silt, lie forgotten walls, drowned temples, and monuments no one has seen for thousands of years? We call them mysteries because they resist conclusion, natural or human, coincidence or evidence. But perhaps their greatest power lies not in certainty, but in the way they stir wonder beneath the water. Ruins, real or imagined, remind us that history is larger than we know, and that the ocean still holds chapters it has not yet revealed. On land, as well as beneath the sea, there are stones that seem to whisper of forgotten hands. Massive blocks lifted, aligned and placed with precision that challenges our understanding of ancient ability. These megaliths are not just monuments, they are puzzles, standing as if to remind us that human ingenuity reaches further back than we often admit. Consider Stonehenge, with its ring of colossal stones rising from the English plain. Mainstream archaeology places its construction around 5,000 years ago, yet its alignment with solstices, its transportation of stones from distant quarries, and its enduring mystery inspire speculation. Could it be a descendant of even older traditions of monument building, ones that stretch back into the shadows of prehistory? Far older still are the great temples of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, dated to around 11,000 years ago. Here, carved pillars with animal reliefs stand in circles, deliberately buried after centuries of use. These megaliths rewrite our understanding of the timeline, built by hunter-gatherers before the dawn of cities. They suggest that monumental architecture began earlier than textbooks once allowed. If such sites survived on land, what might lie beneath seas that have hidden even longer histories? Other megaliths inspire awe with their sheer scale. In Baalbek, Lebanon, stones weighing hundreds of tons form foundations so massive that even modern cranes would struggle to move them. The Great Pyramid of Giza, older than 4,500 years, remains a marvel of precision, its base aligned almost perfectly to true north. Each of these structures is explained within the framework of human capability, yet their presence stirs an uneasy wonder how much skill, knowledge, and organization must have been lost before history began recording it. Legends of Atlantis often describe concentric cities, temples plated in precious metals, and canals cut through stone. When we look at the megaliths of our world, it is tempting to imagine they are fragments of such myths made real. Perhaps not Atlantis itself, but echoes of a human tradition of building beyond what seems possible for its age. Skeptics argue that wonder clouds our judgment. Every stone, every alignment, every structure has an explanation rooted in human effort, ingenuity, and patience. Yet the mystery persists because the scale is so great, the timeline so deep. Our ancestors were not primitive, but creative, resilient, and perhaps more advanced in ways we underestimate. Megaliths stand as time's anchors. They defy erosion, war, and even forgetfulness. And in their silence, they invite us to wonder, if these survived, how many others did not? What monuments lie collapsed, drowned, or buried, erased except for whispers of myth? The stones that remain may be only fragments of a much larger story, a story that, if Atlantis was real, would tell of builders whose legacy rests unseen beneath the sea. If the stones of megaliths puzzle us, then the smaller objects, the artifacts, sometimes trouble us even more. Across the world, discoveries occasionally surface that seem out of place, out of time, or simply inexplicable within accepted history, whether misinterpreted, misdated, or misunderstood. These anomalies invite whispers of forgotten chapters, perhaps even fragments of Atlantis itself. One of the most famous is the Antikythera mechanism, found in a shipwreck off the coast of Greece, dated to around 2,000 years ago. This intricate device of gears and dials functioned as a mechanical computer, predicting eclipses and tracking celestial cycles. For centuries, such sophistication seemed impossible in the ancient world. If this survived, what else might have been lost? Knowledge so advanced it would not reappear for another millennium. Some speculate that it was not unique, but a remnant of an older, deeper tradition of science. Then there are the so-called out-of-place artifacts, the hammer encased in stone, spheres with mysterious grooves, the geode with metallic objects inside. Many of these have been challenged, explained, or debunked by scientists, yet they linger in popular imagination. Why? Because each speaks to the tantalizing idea that our picture of the past is incomplete, that technology and ingenuity may have risen before and then been forgotten. In South America, the Nazca lines stretch across desert plains, geometric figures, and animals so vast they can only be fully seen from the air. Scholars explain them as ritual pathways or offerings to the gods, but for some, they spark speculation. Did an older knowledge of mapping or surveying exist here, perhaps connected to myths of visitors from across the seas? Even coins, maps, and inscriptions sometimes defy neat categories. Old world artifacts, allegedly found in the Americas, though often dismissed as hoaxes or misinterpretations, fuel speculation about contact between continents long before Columbus. If true, they would suggest a world more connected in deep antiquity than we imagine, a world where sailors may have carried stories of lost homelands across the ocean. Atlantis often enters these conversations because it is the ultimate explanation for anomalies. Advanced objects, unexplained monuments, strange maps, all could be seen as traces of a mother civilization scattered like breadcrumbs after a cataclysm. Mainstream voices urge caution, warning against weaving fantasy from coincidence. But the persistence of anomalies reminds us that the past is not tidy. Evidence is fragmentary, interpretation is fallible, and history often surprises those who think it already settled. For a listener at rest, the lesson is gentle but profound. Even small things, an artifact, a coin, a carving, can shake our sense of time. They are reminders that human creativity is not linear, that brilliance may flare and fade, only to be forgotten, and in those gaps of memory, Atlantis waits, not as proof, but as possibility. Perhaps it is less important whether each artifact is genuine or mistaken. What matters is that they remind us of the vastness of what we still do not know. One of the great challenges in the search for Atlantis is learning to distinguish between what nature builds and what humans shape. The Earth itself is a master architect. Volcanoes carve terraces, earthquakes fracture stone into neat blocks, currents sculpt patterns in sand and rock. When divers descend into the blue and find steps, walls, or roads beneath the waves, the question immediately arises, are these the work of water and pressure, or of hands and minds long forgotten? The Yonaguni Monument in Japan is perhaps the most vivid example. Its sharp edges and layered platforms seem like deliberate design, yet geologists argue that sandstone fractures naturally into such forms. To the eye, though, it is almost impossible not to see stairways, plazas, and even what looks like a carved face. The imagination leans toward intention. But is that intuition or illusion? The same debate surrounds the Bimini Road, those great blocks of stone neatly arranged beneath Bahamian waters, invite visions of an Atlantean harbor wall. Scientists, however, point to natural processes of erosion and fracture. The sea often plays tricks, creating patterns that look too deliberate to be accidental. To dismiss them as entirely natural feels unsatisfying. To declare them proof of Atlantis feels premature, and so they remain suspended between both worlds. Even on land, megalithic sites raise questions. The Richat structure in Mauritania, the Eye of the Sahara, is considered a natural geological formation, yet its concentric rings echo Plato's description of Atlantis so uncannily that many cannot resist the connection. Stones can deceive. What looks like engineering may be erosion, and what looks like chance may be intention blurred by time. This tension is important. It reminds us that the search for Atlantis is not only about archaeology, it is about perception. Humans are storytellers. We look at patterns and seek meaning. We see faces in clouds, animals in constellations, and cities in underwater ridges. To some, this tendency is a flaw. To others, it is the spark that drives discovery. After all, without imagination, ruins might remain unrecognized, their significance overlooked. Perhaps the truth lies in humility. Some sites are natural, sculpted by earth alone. Others are human, enduring against the odds. And some may be a blend, natural formations chosen, carved, or adapted by ancient builders. The line between nature and culture is not always clear, and in that ambiguity, mystery thrives. As we read the stones, we are also reading ourselves, our hopes, our skepticism, our longing for connection to the deep past. Atlantis, real or imagined, exists in that space between certainty and wonder. Whether the stones beneath the sea are ruins or illusions, they remind us that the earth is vast, history is fragile, and our hunger for meaning is endless. In 2018, two scientists, Gavin Schmidt, a climate researcher, and Adam Frank, an astrophysicist, posed a question that sounds as if it belongs more to myth than to science. If an advanced civilization had lived on Earth millions of years ago, would we be able to tell? They called their thought experiment the Silurian hypothesis, named after a fictional reptilian species from British science fiction, but their inquiry was deeply serious. It was not about Atlantis specifically, but about the broader possibility of civilizations erased by time. The question rests on a simple but profound idea. Earth is ancient, stretching back over 4.5 billion years. Human civilization, in contrast, is astonishingly young. From the first cities to the modern world spans only a few thousand years, barely a flicker in geological time. If another civilization had arisen tens of millions of years ago, what evidence would remain today? Would we recognize it, or would it be buried, transformed, and forgotten? Schmidt and Frank argued that the most likely traces would not be monuments or artifacts, but geological fingerprints, subtle changes in the chemistry of rocks, sediments, and the atmosphere. Our own industrial age, for example, is leaving behind carbon spikes, plastics embedded in sediments, radioactive isotopes from nuclear testing, and layers of concrete and steel. Future geologists millions of years from now might detect these as anomalies, signs of an intelligent species reshaping the planet. But here is the haunting symmetry. If we are leaving such fingerprints, might others have left them before us? If a civilization rose long ago and fell, their cities would be dust, their bones dissolved, their machines crumble, yet their influence on climate, carbon cycles, or mineral deposits might persist, muted, but detectable, a whisper in stone. The Silurian hypothesis does not claim that such a civilization existed. It merely insists the question is worth asking, for it sharpens our understanding of what evidence endured. In doing so, it widens the space in which stories like Atlantis live, not as mere fantasy, but as possibilities framed by science. For those listening at night, this thought experiment is almost dreamlike. Imagine entire epochs buried beneath our feet, civilizations erased so thoroughly that only chemical shadows remain. Imagine time itself as an ocean, waves of eras rising and falling, each capable of drowning worlds we will never know. The Silurian hypothesis is not proof of Atlantis, but it reminds us that forgetting is the Earth's oldest talent, and in that forgetting, mystery flourishes. Atlantis may be a legend, but legends, like hypotheses, endure because they ask us to look again, to wonder if the past is not as empty as we assume. If an ancient civilization once thrived on Earth, what would remain of it after millions of years? Not buildings, not bones, not fragile artifacts. Time and erosion would sweep those away. But deep within the layers of soil and stone, subtle fingerprints might linger, signs not of individuals, but of industry. The Silurian hypothesis reminds us to search for traces in the chemistry of the Earth itself. Our own age provides the model. Consider plastics. They are everywhere, in oceans, rivers, soils, even drifting in the air. Over centuries, most will degrade, but fragments may sink into sediments, fusing with minerals, creating what geologists now call plastiglomerates, rock-like formations of stone mixed with melted plastic. Millions of years from now, such layers could reveal that a technological species once altered the composition of the planet. Carbon is another fingerprint. Our burning of fossil fuels has already left a distinct isotopic signal in the atmosphere, changing the ratio of carbon isotopes in ways that will persist in future rocks. If another civilization once tapped into ancient fuels, their own surge of carbon would have left a similar trace, detectable long after their cities crumbled. Even agriculture reshapes geology. Our fertilizers alter nitrogen cycles, embedding chemical patterns in soils and rivers. Massive deforestation and farming leave pollen records and sediments that speak of landscapes transformed by deliberate hands. In the far future, these too may be recognized as signs of agency. Then there are the radioactive isotopes produced by nuclear reactions. These are not naturally common, and some persist for hundreds of thousands of years. If a past civilization had split the atom, faint residues might still be buried in ancient strata. Such isotopes would appear as anomalies, sudden spikes in layers of otherwise natural deposits. Metal use, too, leaves signatures. Mining and smelting scatter traces of rare elements across the globe. In our own time, aluminum, once rare in pure form, is now ubiquitous. Future geologists might wonder why such deposits suddenly appeared, as if a species had transformed ore into civilization, then left it behind. All of these fingerprints are subtle, layered within the Earth's slow rhythms, but they remind us of something important. Civilizations alter their planets, even if their monuments vanish. The chemistry of their age endures. Our own legacy may be nothing more than a thin band of plastics, isotopes, and altered carbon locked in stone. If we leave such a band, could others have left one before us? If so, it might already be buried, hidden within rock we have not yet studied closely enough. The thought unsettles and humbles. Atlantis, then, might not be an isolated legend, but part of a larger question. How many times has the Earth hosted intelligence, and how many times has it erased it? The deeper we look into Earth's past, the more we realize how fragile evidence truly is. Human history feels vast to us, yet in geological terms, it is a blink. Cities rise, empires fall, and even their ruins last only so long. stone crumbles, metal corrodes, wood and cloth decay within centuries. Even the proudest monuments of our age would vanish given enough time, returning to dust under rain, wind, and tectonic force. Consider how little remains of our own ancestors from just 10,000 years ago. A scattering of tools, bones, cave art, and settlements, fragments that only hint at entire cultures. Multiply that gap across 1 million years, and the silence becomes almost complete. Deep time erases not only the fragile, but also the monumental. Mountains are ground down. Ocean floors are consumed by tectonic plates and recycled into magma. Glaciers carve valleys, burying and destroying everything in their path. What chance, then, would an ancient civilization have to endure across such vast scales of erasure? Even fossils, among the most enduring relics, are rare. They require precise conditions of burial, mineralization, and preservation. Most living beings vanish without leaving a trace. If entire species can disappear almost invisibly, what of civilizations whose works are far more vulnerable to destruction? The odds of survival shrink with every passing millennium. This is the humbling truth behind the Silurian hypothesis. It is not that ancient civilizations must have existed. It is that if they did, we might never know. The Earth does not keep perfect records. It rewrites itself, layer upon layer, wave after wave, until the past becomes unreadable. Atlantis, then, becomes less of a singular mystery and more of a symbol of this fragility. Even if Plato's tale was allegory, the possibility it represents of entire worlds erased is consistent with what we know of geological time. A great island could rise, flourish, and vanish, its ruins dissolved, its story surviving only in myth. This raises a reflective pause. How much of our own civilization will endure? Our skyscrapers, satellites, and digital archives feel permanent. But imagine 1 million years from now, the cities would be gone, satellites long fallen, the servers dissolved into dust. Perhaps only a faint layer of chemical residue, a whisper in the rocks, would hint that we were ever here. In that silence, future minds, human or otherwise, might speculate about us. Just as we speculate about Atlantis, they too might wonder if there were others before them. Lives and worlds swept away by the ocean of time. Deep time is not cruel. It is indifferent. It does not preserve. It transforms. And in that transformation, entire civilizations may vanish so thoroughly that they leave only questions, never answers. The Silurian hypothesis may begin as a question about forgotten civilizations, but in truth, it tells us more about ourselves than about the past. To ask whether others might have come before us is to recognize how fragile and temporary our own presence may be. It humbles us, reminding us that even the most advanced societies are vulnerable to time's erasure. In one sense, the hypothesis is a mirror. By speculating about civilizations millions of years ago, we glimpse how future eyes might view us. Our fingerprints, carbon spikes, plastic glomerates, radioactive isotopes are not monuments of pride, but warnings of impermanence. They show that what we think of as enduring progress may be nothing more than a thin, strange layer in the rock record. One day, we too may be little more than a chemical anomaly in stone. And yet, there is beauty in this thought. It links us to the long story of Earth, not as rulers, but as participants. If there were civilizations before us, their legacies are gone, but their possibility makes us less alone in time. If there were none, then we carry a responsibility, unlike any before, to be the first and perhaps the only to leave such marks. Either way, the question deepens our awareness of what it means to be here now. For those listening in quiet hours, the Silurian hypothesis offers more than science. It offers perspective. It asks us to hold two truths at once, that we are extraordinary, capable of reshaping an entire planet, and that we are fragile, as fleeting as sand under the tide. This balance is at the heart of Atlantis too, the vision of greatness undone by hubris, the memory of brilliance erased in a night of catastrophe. When scientists ask if ancient civilizations could be detected, They are really asking how civilizations endure and how they vanish. Atlantis becomes not just a question of geography, but a lesson in humility. It may not exist in history, but it exists in meaning, reminding us that the earth has seen more than we can know, and it will continue long after we are gone. So, what does this reveal about us? That we are seekers. We long to know if others have walked this path, if we are unique or part of a hidden lineage of intelligence. We look to myth, to stones, to the chemistry of Earth itself, searching for affirmation that our story is not the only story, and in that search lies our deepest truth. We are a species that wonders, even when answers elude us. Perhaps that is our true fingerprint. The act of asking Atlantis, the Silurian hypothesis, the mysteries of the past. They endure because we cannot stop seeking, and in that seeking, we become part of the same timeless mystery we long to uncover. When Plato spoke of Atlantis, he described its end as swift and merciless, a single day and night of misfortune, in which the island sank beneath the sea. This image of greatness undone in an instant echoes across countless traditions. Myths from every corner of the world seem to remember not gradual decline, but sudden catastrophe. The Bible tells of the great flood, a deluge so vast it swept across the earth, sparing only those forewarned. In Mesopotamia, the Epic of Gilgamesh preserves a similar memory, where walls of water erased entire peoples. In Hindu texts, the story of Manu recounts how a great flood swallowed kingdoms, guided only by divine intervention. Even the Norse spoke of Ragnarok, where fire and flood would remake the world. These myths do not match in detail, yet their cadence is the same: a world flourishing, then a moment of devastation. For ancient peoples, destruction was rarely slow. It came as fire raining from the sky, as waves swallowing the land, as earth quaking underfoot. Catastrophe was immediate, undeniable, and unforgettable. Mainstream scholarship often frames these stories as allegory, lessons encoded in narrative, warnings to live with humility. Yet, there is another possibility. Perhaps these tales, repeated across continents, preserve memory of real events: floods from melting ice sheets, tsunamis from earthquakes, or volcanic eruptions blotting out the sun. For those who lived through them, such disasters would have felt like the very end of the world. Imagine standing on a coastline as the ocean retreats, drawn back unnaturally far, only to return minutes later as a wall of water taller than any building. Imagine watching fire pour from a mountain, skies darkening, crops withering under ash. To experience such moments would etch themselves into cultural memory, passed from voice to voice, until myth carried them forward. Atlantis becomes part of this pattern, not alone, but one of many stories that remind us of fragility. Its sudden drowning is not unique, but archetypal, a reflection of how ancient peoples understood catastrophe: as swift, as total, as unstoppable. And perhaps it is that swiftness that keeps the story alive. Gradual change slips unnoticed into history, but sudden destruction leaves scars on memory. When we listen to these myths, whether of floods, fire, or collapse, we hear more than fable. We hear humanity's attempt to preserve warning across generations. The world can change in a night. Do not take stability for granted. Atlantis, whether real or imagined, is one voice in that chorus, reminding us that civilizations are not immune to the sudden hand of nature. And as the night deepens, the question lingers: if myths of sudden destruction preserve truth, then how many worlds before ours have been swept away, leaving only whispers for us to inherit? When we imagine the fall of Atlantis, our minds often turn to nature itself as the destroyer. The earth is beautiful, but it is also restless, capable of reshaping itself in moments of violence. Civilizations may believe themselves secure, but beneath their foundations simmer the forces of fire, flood, and stone, forces that have ended worlds before. Volcanoes are among the most dramatic. The eruption of Thera around 1600 BCE obliterated much of the island, sending ash clouds across the Mediterranean. Whole communities vanished overnight. Ash buried crops, poisoned skies and set the stage for famine and collapse. To the survivors, it must have felt as though the gods themselves had unleashed wrath. If Atlantis were born of memory, it could easily have grown from such destruction. A powerful society undone not by war, but by the mountain beneath its feet. Earthquakes, too, have long been ruthless erasers. The Mediterranean sits on fragile tectonic seams. Cities have crumbled in moments, swallowed by ground that split beneath them. To stand on solid earth and feel it break apart would leave scars in memory, retold as legends of land vanishing into the sea. Even today, whole towns are vulnerable to the shifting plates that once could have undone coastal settlements in an instant. And then there are floods. As glaciers melted, sea levels rose relentlessly. But floods also struck suddenly, tsunamis triggered by undersea quakes or collapsing volcanoes. Imagine a wave as tall as a building sweeping across plains, crushing villages, scattering ships, leaving nothing but silence in its wake. Survivors would tell stories for generations, shaping them into myths of deluge sent by divine hand. Atlantis, drowned in a single night, echoes these memories of sudden merciless waves. Even fire from the sky cannot be dismissed. Ancient craters across the Earth testify to asteroid strikes that changed everything in an instant. The Tunguska event of 1908, though smaller, leveled forests for miles. Magnify such an event, and it could obliterate cities, even continents. In deep time, these cosmic intrusions remind us that the heavens, too, have played their role in Earth's catastrophes. Civilizations are fragile when measured against such forces. They may plan, build, and believe themselves eternal, but nature requires only a moment to remind them of their limits. Atlantis as myth may be allegory, but it is also realism. Across history, we see proof that worlds can end not with slow decline, but with a single night of upheaval. To listen in the stillness now is to feel that humbling truth. The earth is not fixed, but alive, shifting under us. Its beauty and its terror are inseparable, and when myths speak of floods, fire, or trembling ground, perhaps they are not only warnings of pride, but memories of survival, fragments of worlds already lost to nature's hand. Not every collapse comes from the hand of nature. Sometimes the downfall of civilizations is written in their own choices. Ambition stretched too far, resources stripped too thin, or arrogance that blinds them to the limits of their world. Plato himself framed Atlantis this way: a people once noble, corrupted by pride, who lost their harmony with the divine. In his telling, their destruction was not only physical, but moral, a warning to every society that greatness without humility carries the seed of ruin. History gives us echoes of this truth. The Maya built monumental cities across Central America, aligned with stars, filled with artistry and knowledge. Yet their expansion strained the land. Deforestation, soil exhaustion, and cycles of drought combined with warfare to unravel their world. Their cities fell silent, not because of a single disaster, but because their success became unsustainable. The Roman Empire, too, offers a lesson. Masters of engineering and governance, they stretched their influence across continents. Yet corruption, economic strain, and overreach left them vulnerable. The empire did not vanish in a single day, but its fall reminds us that power carries within it the danger of collapse. When we place Atlantis in this context, it becomes more than a legend of drowning. It becomes a parable of excess. Imagine a society that mastered the seas, extracted metals from the earth, and expanded far beyond what its resources could sustain. In such a world, arrogance might replace wisdom, conquest might eclipse balance. Collapse could arrive not as punishment from the gods, but as consequence of choices, overuse of resources, destabilization of the environment, and relentless expansion. These are forces as destructive as any volcano. Our own age feels this reflection keenly. We live in a time of unprecedented achievement, shaping the climate, mining the earth, altering ecosystems. The same fingerprints we leave in geology are also warnings of our vulnerability. If Atlantis was a metaphor for pride and downfall, then it resonates with us now more than ever. There is a meditative comfort in this perspective, even as it unsettles. Civilizations are not invulnerable, yet neither are they powerless. Collapse, whether by hubris or by nature, reminds us of impermanence, but impermanence also opens the way to renewal. Atlantis may have fallen, whether real or myth, but its story endures, carrying lessons of balance, humility, and the need to live within the limits of the world that sustains us. Perhaps this is why Atlantis continues to haunt our imagination. It is not just the dream of a lost world beneath the sea. It is a mirror held up to ourselves, whispering, "Be careful what you build," for even the grandest empires can drown in their own reflection. When we think of civilizations, we imagine permanence, roads carved into stone, towers rising above skylines, cultures stretching across centuries. Yet history whispers a different truth. Permanence is an illusion. The story of Atlantis, whether myth or memory, reminds us that civilizations are fragile, born of delicate balances that can be undone with startling speed. Consider how young our modern world truly is. The oldest skyscrapers are barely a century old. Our digital archives, which feel infinite, rely on fragile circuits and servers that would vanish in decades without care. Even our strongest structures are vulnerable to the forces of earth, wind, and water. Steel rusts, concrete crumbles, glass shatters. Given time, even the greatest monuments return to dust. If this is true for us, how much more for those who came before? History provides countless reminders. The cities of the Indus Valley thrived with advanced planning and sanitation, yet within centuries they were abandoned, left to silence. Angkor Wat rose in Cambodia as the largest religious monument in the world, only to be reclaimed by jungle when drought and political turmoil set in. The colossal statues of Easter Island, guardians of a once thriving culture, stand today as markers of a people who depleted their resources and faced collapse. Civilizations appear vast, but their foundations are thin. They rely on stable climate, fertile land, social cooperation, and balanced resources. Remove any one of these pillars, and the structure begins to wobble. Sometimes the collapse is sudden, as with disasters or invasions. Other times, it is slow, a quiet erosion until the greatness fades unnoticed. Atlantis embodies both possibilities, the sudden night of catastrophe, and the longer moral decline that made it inevitable. For those listening now, there is a quiet hum of recognition. We sense our own vulnerability mirrored in the story. Our cities feel eternal, our technologies unshakable, yet we too live within limits. Climate change, rising seas, and shifting ecosystems remind us that we are not separate from nature, but bound to it. The same ocean that swallowed imagined Atlantean shores laps at ours today. And yet, there is comfort in this awareness. Fragility does not mean futility. Civilizations may fall, but their stories endure. Even if Atlantis was no more than allegory, it has outlived empires, kings, and nations. Its lesson travels across time. Greatness is fragile, but memory is resilient. To hold the story of Atlantis is to hold a mirror. It reflects not only the past, but the delicate thread of the present. Civilizations rise, shine, and fall, but humanity's capacity to wonder, to imagine, to remember, to seek, remains unbroken. Atlantis may be gone, or may never have been, but the truth it carries is timeless. The sea takes, time erases, and still we tell the story. If Atlantis was real, then beyond its ruins and its destruction, there was once life ordinary and extraordinary, woven together in the fabric of a great society. To imagine Atlantis is to step into a world suspended between history and dream, where human creativity blossomed in ways we can barely grasp. Plato describes a people powerful and organized, the city laid out in concentric rings of land and water, connected by canals. It was not only a place of beauty, but of deliberate design, a city where function and form merged into harmony. Picture it. Bustling harbors filled with ships, markets echoing with voices, temples gleaming with precious metals, streets alive with craftspeople, farmers, sailors, and philosophers. The island was said to be rich in resources, fertile soil, fresh water, forests, and mines of orichalcum, a metal whose brilliance rivaled gold. What kind of society might grow in such abundance? Perhaps one built on trade, sending fleets across seas, exchanging not only goods but ideas. Or perhaps Atlantis was inwardly focused, developing systems of governance, architecture, and art that gave shape to its prosperity. Plato suggests its kings ruled with wisdom at first, guided by balance and reverence for the divine. In those early days, Atlantis may have been a model of order, where justice, knowledge, and strength work together. Yet no society is without complexity. Alongside splendor would have been struggle, divisions of wealth, tensions of power, questions of identity. To imagine Atlantis fully is to allow for both a culture of visionaries, inventors, and explorers, but also of ordinary lives lived beneath the shadow of empire, children learning their place in the world, farmers laboring in fertile valleys, sailors braving distant waters, never knowing if they would return. And always there would have been stories, myths of their origins, songs sung by fires at night, tales of heroes and ancestors passed down from parent to child. A society does not live by stone and trade alone. It lives by meaning. Atlantis, if it existed, must have carried its own stories of creation and destiny, stories now lost, save for Plato's fragments. It is tempting to see them as impossibly advanced, a civilization far beyond its time. But perhaps the truth, if we could see it, would be both more humble and more human. People not unlike ourselves, striving, building, dreaming, fearing, loving. They lived within a world of cycles. Prosperity, ambition, decline. Their greatness, like all greatness, was fragile, held together by choices and chance. Imagining Atlantis in this way grounds it. It is not only a legend of impossible grandeur, but a reminder that behind every myth are lives, men and women who looked at the sea, the stars, and the land and tried to make sense of their place within it. If Atlantis was real, then its greatness would not only have been measured in fertile fields and bustling harbors, but also in the knowledge it carried. What technologies did they wield? What innovations marked their lives? What wisdom did they inscribe into stone, only to lose it to the sea? These questions stir the imagination as much as any ruin or legend. Plato hints at advanced infrastructure, canals stretching across the city, aqueducts channeling water from mountains to plains, bridges spanning the concentric rings of land. Such feats suggest engineering skill beyond the ordinary. To picture Atlantis is to imagine a society where waterways were highways, where ships moved not only across oceans, but through the very heart of the city, binding its people together with the lifeblood of trade. Mining, too, is central to the tale. The Atlanteans are said to have extracted orichalcum, a gleaming metal second only to gold in value. Whether real or mythical, the description points to a culture deeply engaged in metallurgy, shaping tools, ornaments, and perhaps even weapons of unusual sophistication. If they mastered alloys unknown to their neighbors, Atlantis would have seemed otherworldly, a beacon of progress shimmering across the seas. Some speculate their knowledge may have extended further, astronomy, mathematics, even forms of energy harnessing that remain beyond our reach. Ancient builders across the world aligned monuments to solstices and stars. If Atlantis was their precursor, perhaps their knowledge of the heavens was profound. Imagine observatories rising above the city, their priests or scientists charting celestial cycles, weaving meaning from the dance of planets. Yet, innovation is not only grand, it is also quiet. The weaving of cloth, the crafting of pottery, the farming methods that sustain generations. An advanced society might have practiced selective breeding of crops, irrigation of fields, and preservation of food. Their prosperity may have rested as much on these everyday skills as on their shining temples. The temptation is always to cast Atlantis as impossibly advanced, with technologies rivaling our own. But perhaps their brilliance lay not in machinery, but in integration, using the gifts of their land wisely, blending art with function, and living in a harmony we struggle to imagine. Their architecture might have been graceful yet practical, their ships swift yet enduring, their cities vibrant yet ordered. If Atlantis carried such knowledge, where did it go? Did fragments survive, scattered into myths of other cultures? Did echoes ripple outward, seeding skills in Egypt, Mesopotamia, or beyond? Or did the waves erase it all, leaving nothing but whispers that tempt us even now? To think of Atlantis in terms of innovation is to glimpse humanity's timeless drive to build, to explore, to understand, and whether they mastered the stars or simply shaped stone with unmatched artistry, their achievements remind us that ingenuity is not bound by time. It rises wherever humans dream deeply enough to change the world around them. If Atlantis was real, then beyond its temples and harbors lay something even more profound, a way of seeing the world. Every civilization, no matter how advanced, is held together not only by its tools and structures, but by its philosophy and spirituality, its shared vision of meaning. What might the Atlanteans have believed? What stories guided their choices? What values gave shape to their society? Plato describes their rulers as children of Poseidon, born of gods and mortals. This suggests a worldview steeped in reverence for the sea, a natural truth for an island empire. Perhaps their spirituality was bound to water, the tides, the storms, the deep currents that both fed and threatened them. Temples plated in precious metals may have reflected not only wealth, but devotion, shimmering beacons meant to honor the forces they believed sustained their world. Imagine their rituals, priests watching the stars, timing festivals with solstices and equinoxes, weaving astronomy into worship, sacrifices or offerings made at the shore, seeking favor from the sea that carried their ships and their lives, fires lit upon altars, chants rising into night air, echoing across stone rings. Whether symbolic or literal, such practices would have reinforced a shared truth. Their place in the cosmos was not random, but chosen. Philosophy, too, would have played a role. If Atlantis was prosperous and far-reaching, it must have wrestled with questions of justice, governance, and the balance between individual freedom and collective harmony. Plato portrays their kings as just in the beginning, guided by wisdom in that golden age. Perhaps they embraced principles of fairness and order, cultivating a society where reason and morality were intertwined. Their downfall, in his account, came not from ignorance, but from corruption, philosophy abandoned, wisdom replaced with greed. In this light, Atlantis becomes less a technological marvel and more a moral one, a society whose strength lay in its worldview as much as in its engineering. Their philosophy may have taught balance between humanity and nature, or perhaps between ambition and restraint. Their spirituality may have connected them to cycles of earth and sea, teaching them to honor the very forces that later consumed them. For those listening in quiet reflection, this aspect of Atlantis may be the most resonant. For what do our own philosophies and spiritualities teach us? Do they remind us of balance, or do they push us toward conquest and control? Atlantis, real or imagined, lingers as a parable. Prosperity without humility is fragile, and a worldview disconnected from the forces that sustain life cannot endure. The Atlanteans, if they lived, saw the world through eyes both practical and sacred. They built with stone, but also with meaning, and though their temples may lie beneath waves, their story survives as an invitation to imagine not only what they built, but what they believe. To imagine Atlantis fully, we must also imagine difference. If they were real, their society would not have been a mirror of ours, simply an ancient version of modern cities. Civilizations are shaped by their environment, their myths, and their needs. Atlantis, as described, was an island empire, a world born of water, forged by abundance, and guided by beliefs we can only glimpse. How might such a people have lived in ways unlike us? First, their relationship with the sea would have been far deeper. Where modern civilizations often see the ocean as a boundary, Atlanteans may have seen it as an open road, the lifeblood of their power. Trade, travel, and even spirituality would have revolved around tides and currents. Their technology, too, might have leaned toward mastery of navigation and shipbuilding, knowledge passed down through generations in rhythms lost to us. To them, the sea was not just landscape, it was identity. Second, their sense of wealth may have differed from ours. Plato describes orexalcum, a shining metal valued above all but gold. Perhaps their treasures were measured not only in currency, but in symbolism, objects holding spiritual meaning, materials seen as divine. Unlike our emphasis on accumulation, their wealth may have been displayed as offerings, woven into temples and public works, enriching the whole rather than individuals alone. Third, their worldview may have blurred the lines we draw between science, philosophy, and spirituality. Where we separate disciplines, they might have seen them as one continuum, observing the stars as both scientific inquiry and sacred ritual, managing resources as both economics and morality. This unity of thought could explain both their prosperity and their eventual fall. When hubris entered, corruption of belief may have been indistinguishable from corruption of governance. Even socially, they might have been organized differently. As an island empire, unity may have been crucial. Decisions could have relied on councils of elders, priestly authorities, or kings bound by sacred law. Their culture may have valued collective survival above individual ambition, at least in the beginning. Over time, as Plato suggests, this balance may have shifted toward conquest and dominance, an echo of a cycle we still see today. For listeners now, there is both comfort and unease in this reflection. Comfort in realizing that if Atlantis existed, its people were human like us, dreaming, building, questioning. Unease in realizing that their differences may have given them strengths we lack, but also vulnerabilities that doomed them. They may have mastered the sea, yet failed to master themselves. Perhaps that is why Atlantis resonates. It is not simply a story of what was lost, but of what could have been, an alternative path humanity might have walked. To imagine their differences is to confront our own choices, to ask what makes a civilization endure and what makes it vanish. Civilizations rise and fall, but stories endure. Even when stone crumbles and artifacts are lost, memory can travel through the fragile yet astonishingly resilient thread of oral tradition. Atlantis, preserved by Plato, may be one such story, an echo of something older, carried across cultures until it reached his pen. To understand how that is possible, we must look at the power of spoken memory. Oral traditions are more than tales told for entertainment. They are vessels of knowledge binding generations through rhythm, repetition, and ritual. In societies without writing, stories carry maps of rivers and mountains, warnings of danger, explanations of origins, and lessons of morality. They are sung, recited, and dramatized, each telling, reinforcing what must not be forgotten. The details may shift, but the core survives, passed from ancestor to child, like a flame from one torch to the next. Modern research reveals just how long such memory can endure. Aboriginal Australians, for example, preserve stories that describe rising seas and drowned coastlines. Geological evidence confirms these events took place more than 7,000 years ago. The myths of the Pacific Islands speak of vanished lands, and in some cases align with real volcanic eruptions and tsunamis. Even in North America, native traditions recall the trembling of earth and floods that scholars have linked to ancient quakes. These accounts remind us that oral traditions can carry memories across vast stretches of time, surviving where monuments and cities do not. If such endurance is possible, then the story of Atlantis need not be invention. It could be the faded memory of a real place, transmitted from survivors, transformed across cultures, and finally recorded by Plato. Imagine a fisherman's tale of land swallowed by the sea, retold for centuries until it grew into legend. Imagine priests guarding stories of cycles of flood and fire, warning their people that the world is not as permanent as it seems. Through such channels, a local disaster could become a universal myth, carried into history as a parable of fragility. Of course, oral traditions are not precise records. They are shaped by imagination adapted to context, embroidered with symbolism. Yet this is also their strength. By weaving meaning into memory, they make it unforgettable. A child may not remember a date, but they will remember a story of gods drowning a city because its people grew arrogant. Myths survive because they matter. For those listening now, the persistence of oral traditions invites reflection. What stories do we carry? Which of our memories will outlast our monuments? If Atlantis is myth, it still belongs to this lineage. A reminder that storytelling is itself a kind of survival, a bridge across deep time, and perhaps, just perhaps, some myths remember more than we think. Across the world, cultures divided by oceans and millennia share one haunting memory: the flood. From Mesopotamia to the Americas, from India to the Pacific, stories of waters rising and lands vanishing echo with a strange familiarity. Could this be coincidence? Or are these myths, fragments of a shared human experience, memories of real floods that reshaped the world? In Mesopotamia, the Epic of Gilgamesh tells of Utnapishtim, who built a great vessel to survive a deluge sent by the gods. This tale predates the biblical story of Noah, yet both are strikingly similar. Divine warning, rising waters, survival of a remnant. In India, a tale of Manu describes how he was guided by a fish to build a boat that carried him through floodwaters. In China, the legend of Yu the Great speaks of taming great floods that ravaged the land. Across the Pacific Islands, chants and stories recall islands sinking, forcing migrations by canoe. Archaeologists and geologists suggest that these myths may echo real events. At the end of the last ice age, melting glaciers raised global sea levels by more than 100 meters. Vast coastal plains drowned Doggerland in Europe, Sunderland in Asia, Beringia in the north. Communities who lived along those fertile shores would have witnessed their world slowly disappearing. In some cases, sudden surges, tsunamis, storm surges, collapsing ice dams may have brought devastation in a single day. To those who survived, it would have felt like the end of everything. Atlantis fits seamlessly into this pattern. Plato's story of a proud civilization swallowed by the sea may be one cultural thread woven into a global tapestry of flood memory. Whether literal or symbolic, it carries the same rhythm: prosperity undone by rising waters, survival through storytelling, and the transformation of disaster into myth. Flood myths also serve another purpose. They are warnings. They remind future generations that the world is unstable, that the line between abundance and destruction is thin. To ancient peoples, these stories were not distant allegories, but living memory retold by firesides, chanted in rituals, carved into songs. They carried lessons of humility and vigilance. For us today, listening in quiet reflection, the resonance is powerful. Our age faces rising seas once more, as glaciers melt and coasts shift. The same forces that shaped the myths of our ancestors are stirring again. To hear the flood stories of old is to hear both memory and prophecy. What has happened before can happen again. Atlantis may be a singular legend, but it is also part of this broader chorus of cultural memory. Whether born of one event or many, these myths remind us that water is both giver and taker of life, and that human beings never forget the moments when the sea became a destroyer. While myths preserve memory in words, our very bodies preserve memory in another way, through genes. Every person alive today carries within them a record of countless generations, a lineage stretching back not only thousands, but hundreds of thousands of years. If Atlantis were real, could traces of its people still flow in our bloodlines? Genetic studies show that modern humans share remarkable interconnectedness. Mitochondrial DNA, passed from mother to child, traces back to a common ancestor, sometimes called mitochondrial Eve, who lived in Africa more than 100,000 years ago. Y chromosome studies tell a parallel story of paternal ancestry. These findings remind us that despite vast differences of culture and place, humanity is one extended family. Wherever Atlantis may have been, its people would ultimately be part of this great web. Yet within that web, branches and migrations tell of forgotten chapters, Whole populations once thrived and vanished, leaving only faint echoes in modern DNA. Genetic bottlenecks, moments when humanity nearly disappeared, show how fragile we have always been. Around 70,000 years ago, after the eruption of Mount Toba, humanity may have dwindled to just a few thousand survivors. From those, all present lineages emerged. If a civilization flourished during such times, its collapse might leave little direct genetic trace, yet its people could still live on in us, absorbed into larger migrations. Some scientists look at unusual genetic markers, traits, or patterns that appear unexpectedly in populations far apart. Could these be remnants of ancient contacts, voyages across oceans long before recorded history? While mainstream scholarship cautions against leaps of speculation, the possibility lingers. Just as myths can echo forgotten events, genes may carry the silent footprints of encounters we no longer remember. There is also the matter of cultural genetics, knowledge, practices, and languages passed like inheritance, farming techniques, navigation skills, stories of the stars. All of these move between peoples, just as surely as bloodlines mix. If Atlantis existed, its true survival may not be in DNA alone, but in the spread of its knowledge. A tool, a method, or word embedded in distant languages could be as much a legacy as a genetic marker. Imagine this, perhaps the Atlanteans, if they were real, fled their sinking homeland. Survivors scattered across shores, intermarrying with other peoples, their identities slowly dissolving, but their influence carried forward. Their bloodlines mingled, their stories merged with local traditions, their technologies adapted and repurposed. Atlantis would vanish as a place but endure as threads woven into the human tapestry. For those listening now, this reflection carries both mystery and comfort. Even if no ruins are found, even if no definitive proof emerges, it is possible that fragments of Atlantis live within us, encoded in genes, remembered in myths, embedded in the very ways we live. The lost are never entirely lost. They flow forward through time in the vessels of our own bodies and minds. If myths are memories and genes are inheritances, then symbols are the bridges between them. Across the world, cultures separated by oceans and epochs repeat motifs, so similar that they invite wonder: spirals, concentric circles, sun disks, serpents, and cosmic trees. Could these be the shared symbols of humanity, or are they fragments of something older, an archetypal language once spoken by forgotten civilizations, perhaps even by Atlantis? Plato described Atlantis as a city built in rings of land and water, concentric circles radiating outward. This motif of circles appears across many traditions, in petroglyphs carved into stone, in labyrinth patterns traced on European soil, in the mandalas of Asia. Circles are universal, representing cycles of time, wholeness, the rhythm of life. Yet their recurrence raises the question, are they simply natural metaphors or memories of an ancient design repeated across cultures? The serpent is another enduring symbol. In Mesoamerican cultures, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, embodied wisdom and renewal. In Hindu tradition, Shisha, the cosmic serpent, coils beneath creation. Norse myth speaks of Jormungandr, the world serpent encircling the seas. In each case, the serpent represents power, danger, and the boundary between chaos and order. If Atlantis was real, might its people too have revered such imagery, symbols passed outward through migration or trade, later absorbed into myths around the globe? Sun disks and solar worship also unite civilizations. From Egypt's Aten to the Inca's Inti, the sun has been a constant focus of reverence. Some speculate that advanced knowledge of astronomy, tracking solstices, eclipses, and celestial cycles, was encoded into symbols that spread far beyond their origin. A lost society with mastery of navigation and the heavens might well have left such imagery as their most enduring gift. Carl Jung described archetypes as patterns born from the collective unconscious, symbols that surface naturally in every human mind. From this view, Atlantis need not be the source of shared symbols. They arise because humans everywhere respond to the same sky, the same cycles, the same mysteries, yet there is room for speculation. Archetypes could also be the residue of cultural inheritance, fragments of stories carried across oceans and millennia, their origin obscured but their shapes enduring. Imagine an Atlantean survivor carving a spiral on a rock in a new land, teaching children that it means the turning of seasons or the return of stars. Centuries later, the origin is forgotten, but the pattern survives, carried like a seed into the soil of another culture. Symbols outlive memory. They are resilient precisely because they are flexible, able to mean many things to many people, while still preserving echoes of their first meaning. For us, listening in quiet reflection, shared symbols are both mystery and comfort. They remind us that across divides of time and distance, humanity dreams in similar shapes, whether from deep psychology or from a lost civilization like Atlantis. The truth is the same. Our stories and symbols reveal that we are more connected than we know. When we look at a globe, the oceans appear as vast stretches of blue, smooth and featureless. Yet beneath those waters lies a landscape as dramatic and varied as any continent. Mountains taller than the Alps, valleys deeper than the Grand Canyon, plains larger than nations. To explore this hidden terrain is to enter a second Earth, one we know only in fragments. For most of history, the ocean floor was beyond imagination. Sailors guessed at its mysteries, inventing monsters to explain what lay beneath. Only in the last century have we begun to chart it with science. Sonar mapping during the 20th century revealed a world of mid-ocean ridges, trenches, and plateaus. Satellites now measure the subtle rise and fall of waves to detect features kilometers below. Still, less than a quarter of the seafloor has been mapped in high detail. The rest remains a blank canvas, waiting to be drawn. This lack of knowledge matters deeply when we consider Atlantis. If vast stretches of Earth's surface remain unmapped, then the possibility of undiscovered ruins, if they exist, cannot be dismissed. Imagine cities lying beneath silt, their walls obscured by corals, their streets buried in sand. With every new survey, we peel back another corner of the ocean's veil, but the majority remains untouched, silent, and unseen. Even the regions we have mapped remind us of how alien this terrain is. The mid-Atlantic ridge snakes across the ocean floor, splitting continents apart. Submarine canyons cut deep into continental shelves, carved by ancient rivers now drowned. Some mounts rise like isolated islands that never break the surface. Each discovery reminds us that the ocean hides complexity equal to the lands we know, but cloaked in perpetual darkness. The challenges of mapping are immense. Pressure crushes, darkness blinds, and cold numbs. Machines do what humans cannot, scanning and recording data from depths we cannot endure. Yet technology moves slowly, limited by cost, time, and scale. The ocean resists our gaze, keeping its secrets with a patience measured in millennia. For those listening at night, there is something humbling in this thought. We live in an age of satellites, instant communication, and interplanetary probes, yet our own planet remains largely unmapped. The oceans are not only boundaries, they are mysteries, vast enough to conceal entire worlds. If Atlantis rests anywhere, it is here, hidden by the greatest cover of all, the sea's unfathomable depths. And so the map of Earth is still unfinished. Each blank space on the charts is an invitation, each unmeasured slope a question. Atlantis, whether real or imagined, thrives in these gaps. For as long as we do not know the full shape of the ocean floor, there will always be room for the possibility that something extraordinary still waits beneath. The ocean is not uniformly deep. Along the edges of continents lie vast submerged plateaus known as continental shelves, broad, shallow regions that once stood above water when seas were lower. Today they form the transition from land to abyss, but in the deep past they were fertile plains, coastlines, and river valleys where life flourished. If Atlantis ever existed, these shelves are among the most likely places to search. Consider what the Ice Age seas concealed. When glaciers locked up water, coastlines extended far beyond today's boundaries. Doggerland in the North Sea was once a sweeping plain linking Britain to Europe. Sunderland stretched across Southeast Asia, joining islands into a continent-sized landmass. The Bering Land Bridge united Asia with the Americas. All of these now lie drowned beneath continental shelves, reminders of how much world has been lost to the tide. On these shelves, we find tantalizing clues. Divers near India's Gulf of Cambay have reported submerged stone structures, grids of blocks and walls that suggest ancient settlement. In Japan's Yonaguni waters, terraces rise from the seabed, their edges so sharp they appear carved. Off the coast of Malta, underwater megaliths hint at structures aligned with the sun, while debates rage over whether these are natural or human-made. The very fact that such discoveries appear on shelves, the most habitable of drowned zones, is significant. Continental shelves would have been prime real estate for early peoples, rich in fish, close to rivers, and connected by fertile plains. They offered everything a culture might need to thrive. When seas rose, these lands were not destroyed. They were submerged. Villages, farms, perhaps even cities could now lie beneath sediments, preserved in silence. Yet we rarely search there, for the logistics of undersea archaeology are daunting. Silt buries ruins, currents scatter artifacts, and depths require expensive technology. Still, what has been found is enough to stir the imagination. The Villa Petri in Greece lies just a few meters underwater, its streets and buildings dating back 5,000 years, the oldest submerged city yet confirmed. If such sites survive in shallow waters, how many more lie undiscovered in deeper shelves, beyond the easy reach of divers? For those listening, the thought is both haunting and thrilling. The continental shelves are not empty expanses of sand. They are graveyards of forgotten coastlines, libraries of unwritten history. Every meter we map, every anomaly detected by sonar, could bring us closer to a revelation that myths like Atlantis may be echoes of real places swallowed by the sea. The drowned worlds of the shelves remind us that our history is incomplete. We stand on land and call it permanent, yet whole continents of human story may already lie hidden beneath the shallow seas at the margins of our maps. Beneath the water's surface, archaeologists have begun to uncover traces of lives once lived, fragments of civilizations lost to rising seas or sudden catastrophe. Marine archaeology, though still a young science, has already revealed wonders that remind us how much the ocean conceals and how much we have yet to discover. In the Mediterranean, divers found Pavlopetri, a submerged city off the coast of Greece. Its streets, courtyards, and building foundations date back 5,000 years, older than most of the world's written histories. Pavlopetri was no myth. It was real, a place where people traded, built homes, and raised families, only to be drowned by the sea. To walk its streets today is to see a frozen memory of ordinary lives, interrupted by rising waters. Farther east, in the Bay of Cambay, off India's coast, sonar has detected what appears to be a vast grid of structures beneath layers of sediment. Some artifacts retrieved stone tools and pottery fragments suggest human presence dating back thousands of years. While debates continue over dating and interpretation, the discovery highlights how much lies hidden in continental shelves and river deltas, now submerged. Near Japan's Yonaguni Island, divers stumbled upon colossal stone formations with terraces, steps, and what look like platforms and stairways. Geologists argue they are natural formations shaped by tectonic forces, but others insist the precision suggests human intervention. Whatever the truth, Yonaguni exemplifies the blurred boundary between nature and culture beneath the sea. Even shipwrecks tell their part in the story, from Bronze Age cargo ships in the Aegean to Roman vessels scattered across the Mediterranean. Wrecks preserve not only technology but also the flow of trade and ideas. They are time capsules sealed by water, reminders that the ocean is both a destroyer and a guardian of history. Marine archaeology faces immense challenges. Visibility is poor, currents are strong, and silt buries evidence deep. Advanced tools like submersibles, remotely operated vehicles, and sonar scans extend our reach, but progress is slow, costly, and selective. We have explored only a fraction of possible sites, leaving countless others undiscovered. Yet each success carries profound implications. Every submerged ruin or artifact confirms what myths and memory already suggest, that human history is not confined to the land we now see. Entire chapters of civilization may be missing simply because they lie underwater. Atlantis, if real, would not be unique. It would be one of many stories of human cultures lost to the relentless tide. For those listening in quiet reflection, this is both sobering and inspiring. Sobering because it reminds us how fragile our own cities are in the face of rising seas. Inspiring because it reveals how much mystery still remains. The ocean floor is not empty. It is a library sealed in silence, and marine archaeology is only beginning to turn its pages. Even with sonar, satellites, and submersibles, most of the ocean floor remains a mystery. Scientists estimate that more than 70% of the seabed has not been mapped in high resolution. We know more about the surface of Mars than about the world beneath our own waves. This vast unknown is the stage upon which the story of Atlantis continues to linger, a riddle preserved by the silence of the deep. Imagine valleys deeper than the Grand Canyon hidden beneath kilometers of water. Imagine mountain ranges stretching across oceans, unseen by human eyes. Entire landscapes exist beyond our reach, plains, ridges, and plateaus, where evidence of ancient worlds could lie buried beneath silt. If cities once stood along the shorelines of Ice Age coasts, their remains may now rest under these drowned margins, waiting quietly in the dark. Technology advances, but slowly. Sonar surveys reveal shapes, but interpretation is uncertain. A straight line on a scan could be a fault in the rock, or it could be a wall. A grid pattern might be a natural fracture, or it might be the foundations of something built by hands long vanished. Without excavation, the unknown remains unresolved, suspended between geology and possibility. And excavation itself is a formidable challenge. The depths crush, the cold bites, and the currents scatter. Remote operated vehicles explore fragments of seabed, but only fragments. The cost of mapping the entire ocean at archaeological detail is staggering, beyond the reach of most nations. For now, the majority of the seafloor sleeps, untouched, its secrets unbothered. Yet the unknown is not empty. It is potential. Every blank space on our maps is an invitation to wonder. Could Atlantis lie beneath a shelf we have not yet scanned? Could ruins slumber beneath sediments thicker than cathedrals are tall? Or could the truth be subtler? No single lost city, but countless smaller settlements drowned and forgotten, their memory woven together into the myth we call Atlantis. For listeners at rest, there is a comfort in this mystery. Not knowing does not diminish us, it enriches us. The unknown gives space for imagination, for stories, for questions that keep us awake. Under the stars, the ocean floor, unseen and silent, is a canvas upon which we project our longing for connection with the past. Atlantis endures because the unknown endures. As long as the sea hides its depths, the possibility remains that something extraordinary waits below. Perhaps we will find it. Perhaps we never will. But in the vast silence of the ocean floor lies the reminder that Earth is still greater than our knowledge, and its history deeper than we yet comprehend. Imagine the moment deep sea explorers broadcast live images of walls, staircases, and statues lying on the ocean floor. The evidence is undeniable. An advanced civilization existed thousands of years before any known empire. In that instant, history itself bends. The human story, once thought secure in textbooks, would need to be rewritten from the ground up. For centuries, we have believed civilization began around 10,000 years ago, with the first cities of Mesopotamia, the Nile, and the Indus Valley. The discovery of Atlantis, or any equivalent lost world, would shatter that timeline. Suddenly, the dawn of civilization would no longer be a single sunrise, but one of many. Humanity's march toward progress would be revealed as cyclical, rising, falling, and perhaps rising again. the implications would ripple across every field. Archaeologists would return to sites long dismissed, asking what they might have overlooked. Anthropologists would reconsider myths, not as fantasies, but as historical memory disguised in story. Historians would face the challenge of integrating a lost chapter into the narrative of human development, admitting that the record has always been incomplete. It would also humble us. Modern civilization often sees itself as the pinnacle of human achievement, but a discovery like Atlantis would remind us that others may have come before, reaching heights of knowledge, organization, and artistry we have yet to equal. Their disappearance would serve as a mirror. If they could fall, so too could we. The past would no longer feel like a ladder we climb, but like a vast ocean where islands of greatness rise and sink. For ordinary people, the effect would be equally profound. School children would grow up knowing that human history is deeper and stranger than their parents ever imagined. Myths once told as bedtime stories would take on new weight, shimmering with reality. The boundaries between legend and fact would blur, reminding us that memory is long and that truth can survive in unexpected places. Perhaps most transformative would be the psychological shift. To know we are not the first changes how we see ourselves. We are not alone at the summit of history, but part of a lineage of civilizations, some remembered, some forgotten. That realization could ignite both wonder and unease. Wonder at the richness of humanity's past, unease at the fragility of our present. The discovery of Atlantis would not just rewrite the human story, it would remind us that the story is never finished, that the past is larger than we know, and that the sea may still hold chapters waiting to return. If Atlantis were proven real, the discovery would not only unsettle history books, it would ripple through faith and philosophy, stirring questions that reach far deeper than archaeology. For religions across the world. The existence of a forgotten civilization, advanced, powerful, and destroyed, would demand new interpretations of humanity's place in creation. For some, it might confirm what was always believed, that the earth has seen cycles of greatness and ruin, that divine justice strikes down the arrogant. Atlantis would become a parable made flesh, a validation of Scripture's warnings about pride and downfall. Stories of the flood, of Sodom, of divine judgment could be reframed as echoes of the same truth. Atlantis as a historical embodiment of humanity's moral lessons. But for others, the discovery would provoke deep unease. If civilizations flourished tens of thousands of years before the accepted timeline, what would this mean for religious chronologies rooted in younger Earth narratives? If humans reached greatness long before the supposed dawn of culture, how would traditions reconcile this with their doctrines? Believers might divide, some embracing the new knowledge as part of divine mystery, others resisting it as a challenge to long-held truths. Philosophy, too, would be shaken. Atlantis has always been a metaphor for hubris, excess, and collapse. To confirm its reality would give the metaphor new gravity. Thinkers would wrestle with questions of recurrence. Do civilizations inevitably rise and fall, no matter how advanced they become? Is progress an illusion, a fragile cycle destined to repeat? Or does the memory of Atlantis offer us a chance to break that cycle, if only we choose differently? For spiritual seekers, Atlantis could become a beacon. Some would see it as proof of ancient wisdom traditions, perhaps lost technologies of the soul, as much as of stone. The idea of a society more attuned to nature, to cosmic rhythms, to unseen energies, might inspire new movements of thought and practice. Others would caution against idealizing the past, reminding us that if Atlantis was real, it still fell, that wisdom, no matter how profound, can be corrupted. The shock to belief would be profound because it would remind us that truth is never fixed. Myth is dismissed as fantasy, would demand reconsideration. The line between sacred story and historical event would blur. Faith communities, philosophers, and seekers alike would be asked to hold two truths at once: that humanity is older, stranger, and more fragile than we knew, and that meaning must now be rewritten to account for this expanded past. For those listening now, The reflection is intimate. How would you respond in your heart if Atlantis were proven true? Would you feel awe, fear, validation, or doubt? Discovery is not only about evidence, it is about interpretation. And in that interpretation, Atlantis would test not only our knowledge, but our beliefs about who we are and why we are here. If the ruins of Atlantis were discovered and verified, science would face one of the greatest paradigm shifts in history. Archaeology, anthropology, geology, all would need to expand their boundaries to include a civilization far older than anything now accepted. Such a revelation would not only change the past, it would alter how we see the future. First, the foundations of archaeology would be shaken. For decades, scholars have taught that organized civilization began around 10,000 years ago. The undeniable existence of Atlantis, with advanced architecture and complex society, would push that date back dramatically. Researchers would re-examine artifacts, looking with fresh eyes at anomalies once dismissed. Every site might hold new questions. What if this was not an isolated culture, but a remnant of something older? Theories of migration, development, and cultural exchange would be rewritten. Technology, too, would be reconsidered. If Atlanteans achieved feats of engineering or metallurgy beyond what we thought possible for their time, it would force scientists to ask, what did they know that we have forgotten? Did they harness resources differently, build with techniques now lost, or perhaps develop sciences we are only beginning to rediscover? Even modest advances, canals, alloys, astronomical precision, would suggest that innovation is not a straight line, but a cycle, with peaks of brilliance followed by collapse. Geology and climate science would gain new urgency. To understand how Atlantis was destroyed would be to understand how fragile human societies are against nature's power. If earthquakes, floods, or rising seas once erased a civilization, then modern cities face the same risk today. The story of Atlantis would cease to be myth and become case study, a lesson written in stone beneath the waves. Even physics and astronomy might feel the ripple. If Atlanteans charted the stars with accuracy, it would challenge assumptions about how early humans observed the heavens. If their architecture encoded knowledge of cycles, it might link myth with measurable phenomena. Discovery would blur lines between ancient wisdom and modern science, forcing us to ask whether knowledge has been lost as well as gained. But perhaps the greatest change would be psychological. Science, for all its rigor, thrives on humility, the willingness to admit what is not yet known. Atlantis would remind us that the unknown is far greater than the known, that the Earth still holds secrets capable of rewriting the textbooks overnight. For scientists, this would be exhilarating, an invitation to look deeper, question harder, and imagine wider. For ordinary people, it would be a revelation. If an advanced civilization once thrived and vanished, then progress is not guaranteed. Technology alone cannot protect us from time, nature, or ourselves. The discovery of Atlantis would be both triumph and warning. Triumph in proving that human potential is vast, warning in reminding us that potential does not guarantee survival. If Atlantis were truly found, its discovery would not only change science, history, and belief, it would challenge humanity itself. How would we respond as a global civilization to the undeniable proof that another great society once rose and fell before us? Would the revelation unite us in awe or divide us in conflict over its meaning? On one hand, the discovery could be a profound unifier. People from every culture would see themselves reflected in Atlantis. Its story belongs to no single tradition. It is a shared myth, a human inheritance. To confirm it as real would be to give all of humanity a common past, a reminder that we are one species, bound by the same cycles of hope and fragility. Imagine the moment when people across the world watch live images of Atlantean ruins, streets, temples, artifacts broadcast from the ocean floor. For a fleeting time, differences of nation, creed, and language might fade, replaced by collective wonder. On the other hand, human history suggests that unity is never simple. Who would claim Atlantis? Which nation, which culture, which ideology would try to seize the discovery as its own. Religious groups might argue over interpretation. Was Atlantis destroyed by divine will, by nature, or by its own arrogance? Governments might rush to secure artifacts, seeking prestige or technological advantage. Corporations could exploit the site, turning a shared treasure into competition for resources. What should be humanity's story could quickly become another field of rivalry. The struggle between unity and division would depend on us. If we see Atlantis as a lesson, we might draw together, humbled by the realization that we are not the first and may not be the last. If we see it as a prize, we risk repeating its fate, falling into conflict, blinded by ambition. The ruins themselves would become a mirror, showing us not only who the Atlanteans were, but who we are. Perhaps the greatest gift of discovery would be perspective. Atlantis would remind us that civilizations are temporary, that pride leads to downfall, and that survival depends not only on strength, but on wisdom. It could inspire a new sense of stewardship for the earth, for if rising seas once consumed an empire, they could do so again. It could call us to cooperation, urging us to preserve what we have so that our story does not end as theirs did. For those listening now, the question is intimate. What would you feel in your heart if Atlantis were found tomorrow? Would you see it as proof of humanity's greatness or as a warning of its fragility? Would you embrace unity or fear division? The ruins themselves would not answer. They would simply stand in silence, asking us to choose what kind of story we will write next. We have traveled far together tonight, across myths and ruins, seas and sediments, science and speculation. We have walked the drowned plains of Doggerland, stood in the shadow of Yonaguni's terraces, gazed upon the mystery of the Richard structure, and listened to echoes of floods sung in myth. And always, beneath every question, one thought lingered. What if Atlantis was real? Yet even if no diver's camera ever reveals its walls, even if no sonar scan uncovers its streets, the truth remains that Atlantis already lives in us. It lives in the stories we tell, in the symbols we carve, in the questions we cannot stop asking. Whether it was a memory of a real place or a parable woven by Plato, Atlantis has become more than location. It is a mirror. It reflects our fragility. Civilizations, no matter how mighty, are delicate. They depend on balance, on soil that nourishes, on seas that sustain, on climates that remain steady. When those balances shift, even empires can vanish. Atlantis, drowned in a single night, reminds us of what we often forget, that permanence is an illusion, and that time moves with tides stronger than any wall we build. It also reflects our imagination. The fact that a single story, written 2,000 years ago, continues to inspire explorers, scientists, artists, and dreamers shows how deeply we long for connection with the past. Atlantis is proof of the human spirit's refusal to accept limits. We look at the ocean and do not see only waves. We see possibilities, lost worlds, forgotten wisdom, stories waiting to be rediscovered. And it reflects our longing. Atlantis endures because it speaks to something universal, the desire to believe we are part of a greater story, one that stretches further back than we know. We ache for continuity with those who came before us, even if their names and cities are gone. To dream of Atlantis is to dream that we are not alone across time, but other hands once built, dreamed, and loved as we do now. Perhaps that is why Atlantis comforts us as much as it unsettles us. It warns us of hubris, of pride before the fall, but it also assures us that even if worlds are lost, meaning survives. Stories endure, myths carry fragments of truth, carried like seeds on the wind, waiting for us to find them. And so tonight, as we close this journey, let us not ask only whether Atlantis was real. Let us ask what it means to us now. It means humility, to know we are fragile. It means wonder, to know we are imaginative. And it means hope, to know that even if the city is gone, its dream endures in us. The ocean keeps its secrets. Perhaps it always will. But in the stillness of night, as you drift toward rest, remember this: even if Atlantis lies silent beneath the waves, the longing for it lives in your heart. And tonight, that longing is enough. The dream of lost worlds, of mysteries waiting in the dark, is a dream that binds us all together. Sleep now with that dream. Tomorrow, the questions will remain, as they always have. And perhaps, in wondering, we are already closer to Atlantis than we know.